Thank you for joining us for Ask a Therapist, the Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina series, in which we speak with mental health professionals about issues many people face every day. Today we are joined by Anitra Doughty-Wages, a licensed social worker and certified health coach with Blue Cross. We are talking about trauma. She has worked with many members who have experienced trauma from car accidents, war zones, and ones who have experienced generational trauma as well. She says her job is to educate people about trauma and equip them with coping skills so they can manage their traumatic symptoms to live a healthy life. So how is trauma treated?
Trauma is treated in several different ways. Cognitive behavioral therapy is very good for that. It kind of helps an individual process the trauma. So that is probably one of the number one ways to treat trauma. There's also mindful therapy, where therapists use relaxation techniques, deep breathing, meditation, relaxation to help individuals. There's also it's called EMDR, and that has to do with eye movement sensitization. And that's proven to be very helpful with some individuals. It makes them, it's either eye movement or tapping that therapists use. And they use that as a means to help individuals come to terms with their trauma and work towards healing.
Is it possible for someone to feel stuck in their trauma? And then how can you know, what does that look like if you're sort of unable to get over it? Does that make sense?
Yes. So it is possible to be stuck in your trauma. And I think a lot of times that happens when individuals don't seek help and they are kind of just contained in their own way. So what we need to look for in our loved ones is signs of depression, anxiety, hypervigilance. We need to look for any signs of substance abuse, because all of those things can trickle down and have a major effect on trauma. It can definitely take a toll on us emotionally and psychologically. So we want to look a lot at emotions and how people are being reactive, and whether or not to some individuals just shut down and they're all negative responses to everything in life. And that would mean they don't see a positive outlook for their life, for the world, or things of that nature. So pay attention to that when you feel as if you may have a family member that's experiencing trauma, for sure.
Where can people find resources or help trauma?
So there's a lot of resources out there for individuals with trauma. And first of all, we do want to make sure, hopefully, that we have the support of family and friends, first of all. But there are a lot of online resources for individuals with trauma. There's therapy available. There are, again, community support centers in communities, at your local mental health centers. The main thing is realizing that you need the help and reaching out. Of course, if they are insured, you can start with your insurance company and get those referrals that you need to see a therapist or a counselor. And you definitely would take advantage of talking to your primary care provider and letting them know your concerns so that they can do an evaluation as well.
Is there anything else you want to add?
Yes, trauma is ongoing. It's very important for us to know that individuals that experience trauma, they need support, the support of their family, the support of their friends, the support of other community groups, and counselors and therapists that they have found through the community or through their health insurance companies. So yes, therapy is needed, and trauma is a serious thing. It shouldn't be taken lightly. And in any way that we can help a family or a friend that is experiencing trauma, we need to go above and beyond to make sure that they're taken care of.
Can you talk about supporting a loved one who's going through trauma? What does that look like? What can that mean, or what can that be for people?
So we definitely want to support our family and friends with trauma. It can look different in everybody if we're looking for the signs and symptoms, but I would definitely pay attention to mood, their emotions. Think about what they're saying to you in detail, not just at face value. Ask questions. If you have family that's saying that they've experienced trauma or something similar to it, listen first and foremost. That's most important. The communication aspect has to be there. And we have to let them know that we care. That makes all the difference. So we want to be supportive. We want to be a supportive community. So, with our family and friends, and let them know the options that they have, because sometimes people don't know. They have the option of therapy. They have the option of choosing a counselor. And just the fact that family is there and supportive. Sometimes people don't really think that family is there as they should be. So you may have to be the one that steps up and says, you know what, I got you. I can help you through this situation. Let's be reflective and get you to where you need to be in every way possible.
Can you tell me, what are the different forms of trauma?
So there are different forms of trauma, and the first form of trauma is vicarious trauma. And that is where you experience trauma pretty much through the eyes of someone else. You may have experienced an episode of trauma, but didn't actually go through it. But the effects of that is just as traumatic as if you went through that event. So acute trauma deals with a single episode of trauma that an individual can go through. So imagine being in a car accident or natural disasters. Those are considered to be in those categories as acute trauma. So there's also intergenerational trauma, and that deals with trauma that are affected by like groups of people in a community or generation. And that actually can trickle down into generations. So events such as historical events have an effect on historical trauma. And again, it's a group of people that go through a disturbing or distressing event together collectively. So there's also chronic trauma. And chronic trauma is repeated trauma. And that is linked to repeated abuse. So we definitely need to know about chronic trauma.
Is there one that's more severe, or is it possible that even an acute, a singular event can be just as traumatic as ongoing trauma?
Yes, that is very true. So there are categories for trauma, but even acute trauma with one single episode can be just as detrimental to someone's emotional health as trauma that is collective or historical or any other type for that matter.
And it goes both ways, right? So like trauma that's intergenerational can be just as traumatic as something that maybe happened to you in person, right? Like
that is very true. And again, what we go back to every time is identifying the trauma if you can, paying attention to the symptoms and speaking to a healthcare professional about the symptoms that you're having so that the symptoms can be manageable and that individuals can go on and live a successful and happy life.
Is it possible to have trauma that happened in the past years before and just maybe you haven't necessarily processed or dealt with that? I guess it would be sort of like a childhood trauma.
Yes, I'm glad we're talking about that. So there is a such thing as complex trauma, and that deals with, it starts in your childhood. It's developmental trauma. And sometimes as a child, you may have kept those feelings bottled up or may not have fully understood, hey, this is trauma, until we become adults and different scenarios are there. And we do realize that we were a victim of complex trauma, which is usually caused from relationships that we have with a caregiver. So the abuse may be silenced until adulthood, and we realize, hey, something is not quite right, and we know that we need some help. So yeah, that's very evident in a lot of people that go through trauma.
Is it always clear that you've experienced trauma, or is it, I mean, I guess it's different for everyone, but is it always really clear?
So it is not always really clear. As definitely something that we can say there's a blurred line with, and mainly because we all experience everything in life differently based upon our backgrounds, our culture, our community that we grow up in, and whether we have resilience. So a lot of people that may have more resilience may not think, oh, I don't think that I've experienced a traumatic episode. But when they begin to talk about certain issues that they've experienced, it's evident that they may have that anxiety present, the depression, PTSD, and all of those things that are symptomatic of trauma because of what they've experienced.
Kind of talked about this a little bit with the childhood trauma, but even as an adult, is it always an immediate reaction, or is it the kind of thing that can show up over time?
So some trauma can be immediate and some can show up over time. And the complex trauma with children, well, that we experience as children is point on of saying, hey, this is an example of trauma that we suppressed. And usually something does come out in our adulthood that shows us that trauma has been evident in our lives.
How prevalent is trauma? Is it pretty common or is it rare?
It is actually. From the statistics that I have pulled, just about 1 out of every 5 Americans experience trauma in their lifetime. So that is major. It's very prevalent.
Thank you, Anitra, for joining us. This conversation about mental health and getting help is incredibly important. We hope this discussion can help you or someone you know. Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina members can call the number on the back of your insurance card for mental health resources. We hope you'll join us again for the next Ask a Therapist podcast.